Hello, STS Nation. Welcome to Surviving the Survivor's new channel, Best Talk in True Crime. This is the Geographic Profiler, a new podcast in the STS family, where we will be looking at unsolved cases and the latest crime headlines from new and unique perspectives. I am Douglas MacGregor, the Geographic Profiler, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Kathy Decker. Kathy is a retired homicide detective, SAR coordinator, SAR coordinator, search and rescue, and a sign cutter, which is the highest level of certification for a professional tracker. She has the whole trifecta. So, welcome, Kathy. Kathy, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and your experience?
You bet. Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. Yes, so I do encompass all three of those. I had a very successful career in law enforcement, working as a detective. My passion was working the more complex cases, specifically cases of lost persons where you have remains that have yet to be located and or you're still searching to find clues such as that of human remains. So from that, I developed other skill sets to include the visual tracking or man tracking aspect of things. And my stint as search and rescue coordinator was icing on the cake that allowed me to work with additional highly skilled, trained professionals who have very unique skill sets, ranging in anything and everything having to do with search and rescue. So as a result of all of that, upon my retirement in January of 2020, I started considering how I could continue to serve the community with these unusual skill sets that I have. And it occurred to me that if I collaborated and worked as part of a team, as I did when I was working with the sheriff's office, that we would likely have more success than if I were to just venture out independently. So with that, it took a few years, but I've been very fortunate to meet an amazing group of individuals, to include Doug here. And as a result, we have formed a business called IRIS, and that stands for Incident Response and Investigative Strategies. And we're really just about a team of professionals who have these skill sets that if we were to come together, we could be a pretty powerful forward-moving team to deal with some of the more complex issues that are facing law enforcement, as well as working with victim families that have unresolved cases, that don't know what happened to their loved ones. They have never had any answers and are left grieving with little information. We want to help change that dynamic, and I think when we work together, we can do that.
Do you mind just giving us just quickly some of the other skill sets that we have within IRIS?
Oh, you bet. This is where it gets exciting. So we have an analyst who is amazing. She is able to go through detailed information within case files and put together timelines that are all encompassing. Very, very helpful when we're trying to review case information. We can really see where some of the gaps are, where some of the weaknesses are within the case file, and where some of the information has been contradictory. We have a private investigator who has decades of experience out of Seattle, Washington, who not only has hundreds of contacts within her profession, but also has the knowledge and understanding of how to interview people and what needs to be done to move cases forward, not just criminal cases, but also civil cases. We have a retired homicide detective from Seattle Police Department that has written several books. He's very well known, and he has decades of experience in how to work some of the most horrific of scenes. We have a woman who manages her own DNA lab, who is a forensic DNA expert, who is going to be extremely helpful in guiding us in what we can do today with technology and DNA analysis. We have a doctor who is a criminologist who has incredible insight and experience working cases of serial killers, who can really get into the mindset of how someone thinks and operates. And then, of course, Doug, yourself with your geographic profiling abilities and your understanding of environmental factors, it's just hugely helpful. So we have managed to come together to just form this kind of unique working group, and I think we're going to have success.
And of course, we have our amazing support staff that have their own backgrounds and experiences as well that they'll bring to the table. So we have quite the well-rounded group.
We do.
We're definitely going to talk about your experience as a homicide detective and SAR coordinator, but we're really going to focus on the tracking. I think a lot of people know it as man tracking, and you can kind of correct us and what's the more appropriate terminology used these days. I think it's not as well known these days. I think there's a lot of trackers like yourself that are working with SAR groups, search and rescue groups, but they're not highlighted, or they're not when you read about these cases in the media, you don't hear about those trackers in there. So I think it's just kind of a lesser known skill set that's out there right now. I'm also very excited because there's so many similarities and there's a lot of overlap between geoprofiling and man tracking, how we first assess a scene, and what we're looking for, but then there's so many differences and where we go from there. So I myself would eventually, and who knows, one day maybe I'll be your apprentice, but eventually I want to have that skill set as well, as part of my geographic profiling. So I'm very excited about today and the questions we get to ask you today.
Tracking is not very sexy. It doesn't get a lot of media coverage. We are slow going, we're methodical. However, you get a lot of bang for your buck. We can ascertain a lot of information within a relatively short period of time that can really help direct search operations.
What are the first things that you're thinking of that you do when you first arrive on a scene? And I'm sure it differs whether it's a criminal investigation or a missing lost person, but what are you looking for?
No, great question. And yes, it does make a difference to some extent. However, sign evidence, which is what I'm going to be talking about, and really when I say sign evidence, I'm just talking about the physical evidence that we as humans leave behind when we move about our environment. That's what I'm talking about. And most often that's interpreted as footwear impression evidence, but it can be other types of evidence as well, physical evidence that we leave behind when we move about. And whether we're looking for someone who's lost or we're looking for someone who's committed a criminal act, tracking is tracking. The difference is going to be in the mindset or mental state of the person that we're following. And so that's where you have to, as a tracker, try to mirror that and understand that so you can be more successful in following that sign evidence.
What would some examples of sign evidence other than, a foot impression be? Are you looking for, other disturbances to the environment or more forensic evidence, blood or DNA left behind somewhere as they move around? What are you looking for there?
Well, exactly. And especially with my background coming as a homicide detective, I already had a trained eye to look for forensic evidence, such as blood spatter, evidence where we might be able to obtain DNA, latent print evidence. But all of that is also sign evidence. It's also evidence that we leave behind as humans when we move about. So yes, it's all encompassing, everything that you just said. An example for a tracker who's following someone in a wooded environment, for example, what we might be looking for, aside from the footwear impression evidence on the ground, might be evidence of what we might be doing with our hands. So some people, when they walk through the woods, might be touching or picking flowers or bending ferns or picking up sticks and dragging a stick. So we all have these little idiosyncrasies that we do when we're walking about. And so as a tracker, I'm looking for those types of things as well, because that's going to be specific behaviors for that sign maker, for that person that we're following, that may be important to interpret. Because if someone is moving about and behaving one specific way, and then all of a sudden, as we're tracking them, that behavior changes completely, that tells us there's been a whole change in the mental state of that person. So why? What caused that? If it's a suspect who's fleeing, perhaps they felt at that point in time they were in an area where they could be detected, and so fear or panic sets in. If it's a person who has lost their way, maybe they've reached a point in time where they're just physically exhausted, and it's occurring to them that they can no longer continue to move forward. That's a change in their mental psyche. They start to slow down. Maybe they have hurt or injured themselves, and they're starting to limp or move in a way that is inconsistent with what they were doing earlier.
And right there, I think you highlight one of the similarities between tracking and geographic profiling is that I rely on those behaviors that we as humans cannot, it's not that we cannot change, but we don't notice them to change them, right? We're just automatically doing them, unconsciously doing them. And it seems like you're looking for some of those similar behaviors as people walk around and navigate their space, those little ticks and automatic movements, like you said, picking up a stick and dragging it, or fidgeting with something and touching a branch or something as they walk by. Do you find that's the case, that these are that people can't or don't notice these behaviors as they're moving?
Exactly. Yes, and I think you hit on it. Everything that occurs within our mind, our thoughts, our emotions, direct how we move. And when you understand that connection, you really start to understand the psyche of that person, which for what you do is extremely important. And it's also important for what we're doing. Yes, it's amazing when you think about it. And all you really need to do is, next time you're at the airport, grab a cup of coffee, sit down on the bench, and just watch people. Airports are great because you can see every emotion on the face of the earth: excitement, frustration, hurriedness, tiredness. The way people move when they're completely and totally exhausted, they just want to get home. The way somebody moves when they're excited about the new adventure, they're traveling to a place that's brand new. How kids behave, how parents behave with kids. I mean, it's a wonderful insight into humanity to just sit and watch. And so whenever I'm at the airport, I make a point of doing that, as I find it fascinating.
You mentioned a few things in there. Some emotions, fear, excitement. How do you interpret those emotions or some of these other behaviors from people based on their sign?
Great question. So I'll take an example of someone who has gone hiking, and at some point during their hike, they have become disoriented, maybe due to weather coming in or due to unfamiliarity with the trail system that they're on. When you're following someone who is starting off that has the confidence and the comfort in doing what they're doing, you're going to see somewhat of a regular stride interval. And it might not be an extensive distance in the stride because of elevation gain, but it's going to be a regular stride interval. They're walking with purpose. They're walking with confidence. At a point in that hike where they suddenly become disoriented or they're questioning the route to take, there's a complete change in what happens as a result of their psyche. So it could be concern, it could be panic, but I would expect at that point to see that stride interval is no longer going to be consistent. It's going to be inconsistent. There might be times where the person is actually pivoting around to look to the north, to the south, to the east, looking up, trying to gain orientation, maybe considering what to do next, looking at their phone, standing in place. Now, obviously, I can't see them standing there looking at their phone, but I can see them standing in place for what seems to be a few minutes, not moving about, and then making a decision on what to do next. Do we go up to the top to try to get cell phone reception? Do we go off trail, hoping that we're going to intersect and find our way? So these are all behaviors that you can see on the ground and how the person is moving about.
In some cases, you can pinpoint the exact place and time that a person realizes they're lost, and that
Correct.
That confidence drops, the fear sets in. That's pretty fascinating. I think that's really cool.
Well, and what's interesting is I know my own experience, and none of us ever want to claim that we've been lost out in the woods before, but I've been turned around before. Mm-hmm. And you start to really relate what's happening. So what do you do when that happens, right? And typically what I'm doing is looking for the sun to get my direction and reorient, trying to make sure I'm on the proper maintained trail and not on some animal trail or way trail. And then if I need to, I can backtrack my way out, hopefully to get back to where it is I need to be. But there's a whole process that happens to all of us. And the majority of us, I think, can relate to what it feels like to be turned around or displaced for a period of time, even if it's not out of doors. That's happened to people, I'm sure, in crowded environments and cities where you're not used to being, right? In malls, wherever that is, you can relate to that feeling.
And while we're on that, just quickly, what I mean, obviously you're an experienced outdoors person. You're a professional tracker. But what are some suggestions, recommendations you might have for a novice hiker that goes missing? And one recent case that just comes to mind is Taylor Rodriguez. He was just found deceased on Mount Whitney in California, and at least the articles I read said that he was a novice hiker. So what would you suggest to somebody who is a novice hiker that gets turned around in the wilderness?
Well, exactly. So first of all, my suggestion is do your research and pay attention to weather and know your own abilities. And if you're not able or don't feel you have the skill to go to tackle that particular route at that time, then just don't do it right then and there. However, if you are going to do it, make sure you tell someone where it is you're going and when you're going to be due back. The other thing that we've asked people to do, we put this out to hunters and outdoor recreationalists, is to simply take a piece of foil, set it down on like a carpet slab or something soft underneath the foil, step on it with whatever foot gear it is you're going to be wearing when you go on your hike. Leave it in your vehicle. You can take a Sharpie, you can write down the date and time, and then as trackers, if we're called to work that particular scene, we will know what it is that we're looking for, and we'll have a date time reference. And then the next thing, of course, is to try to find the direction of travel. But if you do get turned around or lost, the hug a tree still comes into play. Stop moving, hunker down, do what you need to do to protect yourself from the elements, and wait for help.
Before we move on from the behavioral part of it, I just have a graphic here, and it's a footprint. I'll put it up here. So it's a shoe print. I made this graphic. It's got some things on there. that kind of indicate behavior, lifestyle, physical traits. Now, what are some things on here that you can tell from something like a shoe print, or if there's another example, another piece of sign? So what are some things on here that you can tell of a person? Which ones on here are you not able to tell? And maybe there's some that are missing that I didn't put in here.
Yeah, this is a great schematic because we get asked these questions all the time. And for some of them, it's not an easy cut and dry answer. So for example, handedness, left-handed, right-handed. Well, a few minutes ago, I gave an example of someone who's walking about who picks up a stick and is dragging a stick. Is that drag on the right side or left side of the body? We might better make some generalizations about which hand that person typically uses. Are they right-handed or left-handed? Height, perhaps we can make some generalizations based upon where that sign evidence is. So someone who is walking through a dense forest who is tall, 6 feet, 6'3", is going to be leaving sign evidence that's much higher up than someone who's walking through that same dense forest who might be 5'2" or 5'3". So we can make some generalizations with that. Weight is a little bit more tricky. Maybe some loose generalizations based upon the overall measurements and size of the footwear impression. So for example, if I have a footwear impression that's measuring out 15 inches, 15 and a half inches overall length, it's a boot. And I have a 5-inch width, maybe 4.5-inch, 5-inch heel width and width to the ball of the foot. I could make some generalizations perhaps that this person is of larger build, but I would not be able to assign a specific weight to them. There's so many variables that will affect the depth of that impression on the ground that it's very difficult to do, not something I would be comfortable doing. Physical limitations, yes, sometimes we can see that. We can see that the person is walking with a limp. Perhaps they have a knee problem, a hip problem, or it's an injury that they sustained while they've been out recreating. But we can pick up on that oftentimes. Sex, male or female, again, maybe some generalizations based upon how the person is moving about. But I'll give an example of why that doesn't work. When students are tracking me, I'm tall. I'm 6 feet tall, and I wear a size 12 women's shoe, which often translates into a 12.5 to 13-inch overall length of a boot. Okay. Oftentimes, the trackers who are following me refer to me as he. He's doing this. He's doing that. Not just because I have a large foot, but I move about with confidence in wooded environments in the forest. I grew up playing in the woods, so I'm not intimidated by that. So I'm often mistaken for a man moving about versus a woman. So one has to be really careful about that. Time, yes, we can make some good estimates of what time that footprint was made based upon the weathering effects, based upon damage to vegetation. If we're dealing in an area that has plant life, plants will heal themselves over a period of time. Again, all that is also weather dependent. But with study and repetition, we can become fairly good at making some good estimates about when that footprint was made. So that's a good one. Shoe make, yes. If we have a print such as the one you have an example of here that has good tread design, we can oftentimes identify the make and model of foot gear, which could also be very helpful for investigators, especially when they ultimately serve a search warrant at a suspect's home, for example. They'll know specifically what make and model of foot gear to be looking for that relates back to that particular crime. So that's good. Direction of travel is huge. And that's one that I think about every time I see a case and read about a case where there's been a vehicle located by law enforcement or by search and rescue that was believed to be associated with the person who's missing or lost. Direction of travel. So, first of all, when you're searching around the vehicle, are you finding impression evidence that's specific to the person that you're looking for? That's the number one question. Do you know for sure that your person who you're looking for is the person that was last known to have been driving that vehicle? Then secondly, are there any other indications of intersecting sign, either by a vehicle and or other humans that are interfering or interacting with this person? And what's the direction of travel? Which way are they heading off? Do they continue heading that direction, or are they abruptly turning and going a different way for some other reason? So direction of travel is probably one of the most important pieces of information, and where trackers can be the most helpful for law enforcement who are needing to plan where to put their SAR resources or their law enforcement resources. They're limited. So are you going to search north for someone who has sign evidence leading to the south for a mile and a half? Probably not. It would make more sense to direct those resources in the direction of the sign maker versus going in an opposite direction until or unless you have information later on that sends you and causes you to want to redirect those resources. So yeah, this is a great slide because it does touch upon all the questions that were often asked. Personality, yes, to some extent you can see a personality. You can tell someone who is walking typically, who's really anger. There's a lot of frustration and anger, the way that they're moving about. And again, I'll use that airport example to help explain what I'm talking about. We've all seen people at the airport who are just really mad, right? Their flight has been delayed.
All the time.
Not getting what they want, stomping their feet, scuffing, sluffy. I mean, that's what we're looking for. And yes, so that presents itself to our eye as well.
One thing I didn't put on here, I was just thinking of something you said made me think of it, but was injuries. Is there a sign other than obvious, blood on leaves on a tree, but based on like a footprint or something they leave? Are you able to tell if they're injured by their gait or the way they're walking, if they have a limp, that kind of thing?
Sometimes, it depends. So the more information, the better. So you mentioned like bloodletting. So of course, if we see blood spatter or blood pooling, that is helpful. But we can also see if someone trips and falls, we see that evidence, and then we can oftentimes tell when they've gotten back up and started moving again. If there's a change in how they're moving, would indicate potentially an injury that occurred as a result of that fall. So those are the kinds of things that we would be looking for. Or perhaps somebody who's now putting their hand on trees to help stabilize themselves because they're disoriented, maybe feeling a little lightheaded. We can sometimes actually see where that tree bark has been rubbed off, or the moss on the tree has been compressed and rubbed off by that individual as they're using the tree to stabilize themselves.
Samantha Sayers, she went missing on August 1st, 2018. The case is still unsolved. I believe officially she's considered a missing person. She was last seen hiking on Vesper Peak, which is in the North Cascade Range in Washington State. Now, Vesper Peak is it's a 10-mile, I believe, Kathy, roughly a 10-mile round trip, the whole trail, the Vesper Peak Trail.
Yes, it's very close to being 10 miles round trip, and it's an arduous hike. It's not something that a novice hiker would be attempting to do or should be attempting to do.
Did you participate in the search for Samantha Sayers?
I did not at the time that it occurred. I was aware of it. I became involved in this case sometime after the fact, just several years ago, in an attempt to assist family of Samantha Sayers and their quest to better understand what happened to her. But I did not participate initially in the actual search. But this is a great example of even when law enforcement does everything right. And what I mean by that is in this particular case, when the 911 call came in from Samantha's, I'll call him boyfriend at the time, law enforcement quickly gathered up and notified search and rescue resources and had them on the ground by mid-morning searching for her, which was absolutely the right thing to do. They had a couple weather issues and were not able to utilize a helicopter right away, but they did get a helicopter up eventually, which was helpful. And they also used map trackers on this case, which was also a good call. Trackers did identify sign evidence that they believed to be Samantha's coming down the south side of the mountain. And what is important about this is that's consistent with one of the eyewitnesses that believed he saw her walking down the south side of the mountain, which would be the opposite of the way that she should have been going to return from the summit back down to where her vehicle was. So we had clues. We had witnesses that saw her, believed they saw her. We even had some video footage of her. So we are fairly confident that she made it to the top of the mountain. And it seems from the evidence that we have that she walked down the south facing side of the mountain for some reason, we don't know why, and then seemingly vanished. This is a very, very difficult search area, especially on the south side. A lot of trees, a lot of cliffs, very, very dense vegetation. So trying to just fly a drone, for example, a drone that's not LiDAR equipped over the search area would be very difficult. You would more than likely cause damage to the drone and it wouldn't yield any beneficial results. So searchers did the best that they could getting into that area, but she has yet to be recovered. And it's a sad story for many reasons, but Samantha's the only person I'm aware of that has literally vanished off this trail. This is a well-known hike. There's a lot of people that hike this that are very experienced in the summertime. So when she was on this trail in August, she was not alone. There were a lot of other people also utilizing this trail, which is helpful because we can identify her as she's making her way up to the summit. The problem comes when we're trying to identify her coming back down. We don't have witnesses that are able to positively identify her, and we have evidence suggesting she went the wrong way. And that's what we're left with at this point until we can find her. And once we find her, we might be able to glean some additional information about what happened and how she ended up where she ended up.
For everybody listening on audio, I have an image up here right now of Vesper Peak. And it shows some of the other peaks around, and I have a rough outline. I think it's fairly accurate of the Vesper Peak trail going from the trailhead up to the peak. And at the top of the peak, I have a red polygon area, which Kathy is describing as her place last seen, the point last seen of Sam Sayers and the direction she may have been heading. And you can find this on my YouTube channel if you like to look at the image. But Kathy, if she came up that trail and she started heading down a different direction that obviously wasn't marked, wasn't the specified trail, what do you make of that? What would you have made of that as a tracker if you had been there at the time? Or what do you think the other trackers thought of that? And how did they go about investigating it from there?
No, great question. And the other trackers that work this, I'm very familiar with and have worked many cases with. They're expert trackers, very, very good. And so one of the things that they noted was although they could follow her sign going down, they did not locate that sign turning around and coming back up again. And so part of the challenge that they had on that particular day was that the tracking team did not consist of members that were all on the same page as far as comfort level and being able to continue going down that very dangerous side of the mountain. And part of the search and rescue rule is if you have even one member that's not comfortable, you stop. You stay together as a team, you come in as a team, and you go out as a team. And it wasn't worth potentially causing injury to the search and rescue members. So the decision was made at the point that they could no longer follow her anymore going down the south side to stop and to head back up and return to base before darkness set in.
I think I initially would have perceived it as, an independent activity. But you mentioned team. So is tracking more an independent activity, or do you track as part of a unit, as part of a team? And what does that bring to the table?
Oh, great question. Tracking should always be done as part of a team, if at all possible. And here's why. When we work individually, we can talk ourselves into and out of just about anything. When we're in a team of two, typically there's one personality that's going to be stronger than the other, and maybe the one that's stronger is going to lead the conversation. We have found over time that a team of three is just the right number. A team of three allows you to have different perspectives from different angles, different life experiences. All of that becomes hugely important. Now, that's not to say that I have never, ever tracked solo. Sometimes you have to. That's just the way it is. But oftentimes you can at least find someone to come along with you, even if they have no trained tracking ability. They're another set of eyes. And I call it tracking with a 3-year-old because they're constantly saying, well, why, what, where, which is what you want, because it checks you. If you can't explain to them what you're seeing, and why you're going the way you're going and why you're doing what you're doing, then you're probably not on the right sign either. So I find that to be very beneficial, but I would always suggest tracking as a team of three, ideally.
No, that makes complete sense to me because, as a geographic profiler, there's not many geographic profilers out there. There's enough people that have been trained a little bit in it for, as part of their crime analyst functions. But there's not many out there. And a lot of cases that I work, which, a lot of times from the GP side of it, the geographic profiling side of it, I do a lot of those activities independently, but I'm always bouncing off ideas off, the other colleague that we work with that's a behavioralist, and then another colleague I have who is a geographic profiler for law enforcement as well, and likewise he bounces ideas off me. So it's always good having that other, opinions and set of eyes as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I had to smile to myself when you said there's not a lot of geographic profilers out there. There's not a lot of trackers out there either.
No.
So I feel your pain. It often can be a challenge just to find others that can come out and help.
Do you also work in a team with individuals with other skill sets? Like, do you work with, for example, do you work with canine teams? Do you work hand in hand with them? Do you complement one another?
Oh, absolutely. I am a huge advocate of canine resources. My husband, who's retired law enforcement, worked canines for a number of years. He was a bomb tech and worked bomb dogs. I learned most about canines and what they could do when I was the search and rescue coordinator with King County. And it occurred to me that this is an amazing resource. And why would you not want to pair man tracking with canine? And I actually did that on a number of cases that I worked on homicide scenes. I would have a search and rescue canine group, and this was a bloodhound trailing group, come out, and they were scent specific. And I would let that team work the scent from the scent article. And then I would man track it, or I would man track it first before the dog team worked. But at any rate, we could each independently determine the route, the way the person went, how they were moving about, which is incredibly helpful, but it also helps to affirm that you're right. So if the dog team and I are both in agreement, then that's amazing. That's great. And then that's information we can give to law enforcement so they can perhaps look for surveillance video, cameras along the route, those kinds of things that are going to help affirm that that was the direction of travel that that person took. And even with cadaver dogs or HRD dog, human remain detection dogs, same thing. I mean, that dog is trained to identify and alert on the scent of decomposing human remains. From a tracking perspective, that's great. Let the dog find the area. And then as a tracker, I can identify, hopefully, how many tracks there are and what those individuals are doing. Is it just one person who walked in and died? Or is it a situation where there is commingled tracks? So this individual was with 2 or 3 others and they were in close proximity to each other. There's some type of perhaps a fight or a struggle or something that's happening. I can help read that sign so we can better understand how the person got dead. So the dog can tell us where the dead person is, but they can't tell us how that person got dead. And that's where tracking can be a helpful resource.
Thanks for watching on YouTube, joining us on audio, and being a part of STS Nation. Find us at Surviving the Survivor, #Best Talk and True Crime. You can also find me, Douglas MacGregor, on YouTube and on all my socials at the Geo Profiler. I will post part 2 with professional tracker Kathy Decker in the coming weeks. In the meantime, please like and subscribe, comment, share, and stay safe.